This is a FarmDoc Daily webinar. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason, the government shutdown and agriculture. Today, we'll discuss the shutdown and its impact on agriculture and how that might continue over the next several days or weeks, depending on how quickly Washington, D.C. might be able to settle this matter. We have a series of guests with us. Many of them you will recognize. The FarmDoc team is with me here in studio. Others have joined us from other parts of the United States. I'll let Nick Paulson, agricultural economist, introduce most of the guests. Nick is in the center here, and Joe Jansen is with us, along with Gary Schnicke and Jonathan Koppas. Who else is joining us today, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So we brought in a few guests to join us here today. So in studio, we've got Jonathan Koppas, Gary Schnicke, myself, Joe Jansen, and Todd Gleason will be moderating from the FarmDoc team. And then we're also joined today by Sarah Lowe, who's the professor and department head in agricultural and consumer economics, also a former USDA employee. We're also joined by Jenny Ift, although maybe experiencing some audio difficulties with Jenny, but we'll see if we can make that work. Jenny's a professor and Flinchbaugh Chair of Ag Policy at Kansas State University, in Illinois native, but also previously in her career worked at USDA. And then finally, Mark Schlossner is the retired Illinois state statistician with USDA NASS, and he'll be joining us as well. And all three of them have experience working in federal government during previous shutdowns, and so I thought it'd be good to bring in some of those perspectives here with us this morning. So I'll hand it back to you, Todd.
Thank you very much. Let's turn our attention now to Sarah Lowe. Sarah is the department head here at the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences for the Department of Consumer and Economic Sciences. Thank you. Agricultural and Consumer Economic Sciences. Sarah, thank you for being with us. Let's start with some things I think that you'll have a good handle on. If the government is shut down for a month, will USDA lose a month's worth of output and work time? Is our first question for you.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of the FarmDoc webinar today. Yeah, so I worked at USDA for 10 years in Washington, D.C., and your question is a great question. If we're closed for a month, do we lose a month of work? No, we lose more than that. Every time Congress thinks about having a shutdown, managers at USDA are scrambling around, putting together contingency plans. So there's a lot of work that goes in every time there's the potential for a shutdown. So we're always kind of on guard. So we lose, there's usually about 2 weeks before a shutdown, we're kind of preparing for a shutdown. Then if we're closed for a month, we have that month that we're shut down. Then we come back and you think, oh, well, maybe the end of October reports will come out because it's the end of October, the government's open. But no, then we're kind of scrambling to get personnel, resources, machinery back online. So every time there's a shutdown, there's a lot on the front end and on the back end, in addition to the time that the actual shutdown is occurring.
Mark, how are USDA statistical agencies affected by the shutdown? Not just what reports are gone, we'll get to those in a bit, but how are the things that you do affected by the shutdown? For instance, crop production reports and the kinds of things that happen in the field.
I think the main thing outside of the federal employees and all that is the data collection process, which is typically contracted out to people who are not federal employees. And for an October crop report, you'd like to have all your data collected on October 1. That's kind of impossible. So it starts a few days before October 1 and goes to a few days after October 1. Now we've got the data collection done, but there's processing and tabulation and looking for outliers and fixing mistakes, making a call back to someone who's reported something unusual. That process takes another few days. And eventually we get to around the 12th of the month where a crop production report can be released. In a similar note, at the end of this month, October, there should be a monthly prices report, but that also requires data collection from the grain elevators and, let's say, ethanol plants and places that buy grain from farmers. And that data collection should be ongoing now. It's not. All the data collection stopped, as well as the federal employees' efforts have stopped. So I would say that the end of month prices report from NASA is in jeopardy.
And then, Nick, because you were in Washington, D.C. on a sabbatical from here, working in D.C. during the last big shutdown, what is your take on how a shutdown impacts the U.S. government and taxpayers?
Well, and I'd be interested in maybe hearing from Sarah and Mark and Jenny, if we can get her on their experience and kind of operations during a shutdown. But so, what I was doing on sabbatical, I was actually working at the White House campus, and I was supposed to start, but the shutdown was taking place at the time in January of 2019. And so it took about a week and a half for them to even have the kind of the temporary, not temporary, but the staff that were sort of rotating through between exempted or the necessary classified employees to even get me like a computer that would even be able to access some of the things that we needed to do for what I was there for. And then my experience in the first couple of weeks as the shutdown continued to play out was that it was just like a bare bones staff on a daily basis. Some people, again, were exempted and there are some of the higher ups. But then, those of us that I was kind of unique in that I wasn't really directly a federal employee. So the shutdown didn't apply to me, but there was also nobody there for me to really work with and be directed by in any way because they obviously were being affected. But be interested to hear what Sarah's take is on, working or not working during a shutdown.
Yeah, definitely. During the really long shutdown in 2013, I was pretty junior at ERS. I'd been there about 5 years at the time. And yeah, this is before take-home laptops, before USDA cell phones. So it really was a couple weeks at home. Very frustrating, sitting around waiting to be able to do some work. I had a bunch of ACE students over for dinner last night, and I showed them some pillows that I made during that 2-week shutdown because it was a good time to do some sewing.
And Mark, for you, when shutdowns happen, what took place in the Illinois Department of Ag building where you worked?
Similar to what Sarah said, only the higher ups were exempted. I was never exempt, even though I worked for a long time. I just didn't get to the high enough level to be exempt, which is kind of sucky because then you go to work, but you don't get paid. So I stayed home, and mostly what people would do is find some household chore. You paint something, you take on a project. It's not smart to plan a trip because you don't know when the shutdown's going to end. So you could go off and travel, and then boom, it ends. Now you got to be back. So you can't do much long range planning. You can kind of fill up your days with, I don't know, mowing the grass twice or stupid stuff like that. But finding a home project is basically what I would do.
And it appears to me that Jenny Eft is available. Jenny, you're on mute. If you can take yourself off mute. We're asking what experiences are like during the shutdown. You worked for ERS, is that correct? And how did shutdowns go for you?
Right. So Sarah and I were there at the same time. So it happened to us at the same time. And I think kind of reflecting what everybody else said, there was so much uncertainty. You didn't know if you were going to go to work the next day or not. I actually worked on a research paper during the time. I was didn't have access to the data, but I had enough. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that. I had enough other materials that I could do some writing and move some stuff forward. So that actually helped me handle it a lot better. It was really frustrating not to be able to do my job and not to know when we were going to go back. And I'm betting a lot of government employees feel like that right now.
We do have a couple of polls that we want to bring up. And while those are coming up, and even while you're in the midst of them, we'll continue to have our conversations here. Mark, I want to turn back to you for just a bit and ask about what things we've missed so far. You'll be most familiar with the USDA NASS reports, probably some of the World Ag Outlook Board reports too, because they come out most of the time on the monthly at the same time. What have we missed at this point from USDA NASS?
So far in October, there's 2 reports from NASS that have not gone out, and they are what's called principal federal economic indicators. They're just fancier. They get a little bit more emphasis from the government as a whole. And in comparison, this would be like the monthly unemployment rate, which comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, or the monthly consumer price index, the rate of inflation. Those reports make the news all the time. So the monthly crop production report and cattle on feed are both principal federal economic. They've been missed, but there are others, and I think it's worth talking about them. They may not have a big impact on Illinois farmers and ranchers, but there are weekly broiler reports, right? The production lifespan of the birds is so short, it's every week. And in some states, broiler production is a big deal. And across the country overall, broiler production is quite large. Similar with monthly milk production, monthly egg production. I mentioned the price reports. Those are at the end of the month. So theoretically, there's still time, but I would say it's in jeopardy to do all the proper data collection and stuff for a publication at the end of October.
Yeah, so the principal economic indicator reports would also include the World Ag Outlook Board, comes out the same day as the crop production numbers. Those are the numbers that are estimating what's happening across the planet and include the updated USDA crop production figures. I'll ask here, Joe, from you, when those numbers do not come out, and we've been through this at least one time when we've had that 35-day shutdown during the first Trump administration, where the market seemed to be lackluster, didn't have a place to go. What impact does it really have? And how do these play in that principal, if you know, principal economic indicators used by the Federal Reserve?
So I'll take the first part of that. And we don't know what would have happened to prices if there were an October WASDE report. The effect on price levels is difficult to say because the directional impact of the report changes from month to month. What we do know is there's a lot of price volatility around the release of a report. So that tends to be a time where there's a lot of price action because the market's reacting to what's in the report. And basically what happens during a shutdown is the market keeps trading and we just have nothing to react to. And so price volatility is actually maybe lower. The price just isn't moving around. The market's looking for other things to get a sense of what supply and demand is doing. One thing that doesn't happen around a USDA report is there's not sort of that level of sort of reduction in uncertainty. There's not a resolution of uncertainty about what's going to happen. So I think we kind of shift some of that price volatility around. So it tends to concentrate around USDA reports, and it's not there. It's spread out across a longer time period because we just don't have the information. Now the market's moving along. We're still sort of processing the information that we do have. And so it's not like we're getting the prices wrong. It's just we're missing a key check on everyone's understanding about what supply and demand is doing.
Let's do our first poll and we'll continue our conversation. We'll bring that up. The poll question is fairly simple. How much has the shutdown impacted your farm or ag business? Go ahead and answer those questions. How much has the shutdown impacted your farm or your ag business? In the mean space, I'll come back to you, Mark Schleusner. What reports are upcoming that we may miss?
In November, it's similar to October. There'll be a monthly crop production report around the 12th of the month. That coincides with the World Ag Outlook Board, the global supply and demand. Also, there'll be a monthly cattle on feed. And again, those weekly broilers, that doesn't stop. At the end of November, there's a prices report. The next set of principal federal economic indicator reports would be quarterly hogs in December, also cattle on feed in December, and finally then the annual crop production report in January.
Let's take a look at some of the results from the poll we just ran, and Mark will come back to you with another question in just a moment. Primarily, most people say they've been slightly impacted by the shutdown to this point. 37% of you answered that way, and 25% said they've not been impacted at all. So our second question, it's on this same idea. Have you been able to access needed USDA services due to the shutdown is coming up? Again, That next question is, have you been able to access needed USDA services due to the shutdown? Go ahead and answer that. And one last question for you, Mark, and I don't know what these might have been, at least I think I know one of them, but what about NAS events? What kinds of things does NAS do that we've missed so far in terms of events?
I think one is worth mentioning in particular. On Tuesday of this week, there was a meeting scheduled called a data users meeting. The live portion was in Des Moines, but it would also be virtual for anyone who wanted to log in from anywhere. It actually gets a lot of traffic, and there are representatives from NAS, the Farm Service Agency, the Risk Management Agency, Economic Research Service. It's kind of the USDA nerds. That's a compliment where I come from. And then the data analysts or data users can ask questions directly to people who supervise and compile those reports. And it's a chance for the government people to hear from the non-government people about what should be happening, what they think is perhaps not happening well, or sometimes there's a few thank yous that come in through those meetings, but more often it's, can you do this? Typically break it down more finely. If it's cattle on feed, more weight groups. If it's some other report, further geographic distribution. Let's go to the county level for this report, which takes time and money and sometimes not feasible.
That is, that data users group meeting is one that I have been to several times over the years, and people that I talk to, the brokers, particularly on WILL radio, oftentimes will be there in person more often than not. Those were in person and still remain in person events, and they'll come and they have a secondary gathering, I think the second day of that particular program that they do as well, usually in Chicago, if that's where that happens. The data users group has been moving around a bit, but they are useful, and reporters as well join. Many people will be familiar with Karen Braun's name. I've seen her there many, many times. She was with Bloomberg at the time and has now moved on to one of the brokers firms that I talk with each and every day of the business week. So here are the answers that we've gotten from, have you been able to access your needed USDA services? 20%, or rather 16% said no, they didn't have any issues.
Have had issues.
No, that had issues. 16% they had issues with multiple services. 40% said that they have had issues with at least one service. 41% said they haven't needed anything from USDA at this point. And 2% say, I have continued to be able to use all the services that I wanted from USDA. So that wraps up the first set of polls. There will be more coming. Let's turn our attention here in studio to Gary and Nick and Jonathan. A couple of things. Can you talk about what Gary, and I suppose Gary and Nick, about what kinds of things and services that farmers might miss this month or next month from USDA, particularly as it's related to crop insurance and program payments? And then we can talk about loans. I think that's kind of a different issue, but the first one would be payments themselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the timing, the specific timing of the shutdown right now is interesting, because October happens to be when we finalized the previous marking year average price, which is kind of an important piece of information for the ARC and PLC commodity programs. It also happens to be a time of year where we're harvesting, and if there are going to be any crop insurance indemnity payments, at least on some of the individual products, there could be some work going on at RMA offices that would be relevant to that. So there could be some delays there. But I think ARC PLC is probably the big one. We did get news just this week in the last couple of days from Secretary Rollins that FSA offices are going to be back in some capacity starting today, according to the press releases. I suppose we should take credit for having this webinar, and then they got their act together to get things going. But so that could help. But I would say that even in the 3 weeks that staff have been out, again, as Sarah and Jenny talked about, that just creates delays and backlogs and things that have to get caught up on. work is piling up presumably at these offices, and so it'll create some delays. But hopefully, I guess maybe getting back into the office at some level to get those things processed. Gary, do you have more to add?
No, our PLC things would be the big things right now. On crop insurance is a federal program. It is administered by private companies. And private companies, my discussion with them, as well as looking at their website, say things are proceeding as normal. So if you have an insurance claim on RP, HP, or YP, or any of the federally insured products, the private insurers are working through that. They obviously don't have the access to RMA, or as much RMA as they would previously have without the shutdown. So that could become more problematic if the shutdown lasts a very, very long time. I would note that the livestock programs continue to be offered, so those are being offered even though we are under a shutdown. So LRP and some of those are moving forward. So RMA at least has a staff there to make those premiums and quotes available. I guess from my standpoint, the bigger thing that this shutdown does is what it does for 2026. 10 years behind, but 2026. I mean, this is the time when the 2026 changes and rollouts are being done. Private or the crop insurance companies, as well as the universities and us, would like to know what those changes are, and they're not. We're not seeing those any information on that at that point in time. One wonders whether, will this impact the release of 2026 rates, which happens at the end of November? Will we know what the changes are going to be on crop insurance? And we don't know. So we'll see what this could have a pushing back of 2026 programs. I would note that the one big beautiful bill also made changes, 80%, or the 80% subsidy increase on SCO. How much of that systems are done to make that happen is a good question. Again, well, you look at it from the outside and say those changes are small. They present issues, and you got to get it right. Or RMA and the private insurers have to get it right. They almost always do, and part of the reason they almost always do is they have time to get it done, and they're having 2 less weeks now. So,
but they have 2 last weeks. I have a question about that. So, part of that is done within the university system. Part of it's done within the crop insurance system, I think, as well. How much of the piece does RMA or the federal government actually handle in the back end?
So they handle. Well, they all right. So they release the policies,
right?
They're the policies, and they release the premiums or the rates that go into the premiums. And before a private insurer or university can do any education, they have to have that material. You would prefer to have that material sooner or later, because these are sort of legal documents, or at least something that Jonathan wrote, and so they're not the easiest thing to digest there. And
I'm trying to hide here at the end, Gary. I don't want to be blamed for anything. I don't want to be blamed for anything.
I mean, it's just the time. It always seems like the 2026 year comes up faster than you think. 2 weeks out of it isn't all that helpful.
Jenny, anything from Kansas State University's perspective, or just the western part of the growing regions in the United States, and particularly thinking about wheat growers, and maybe sign up for crop insurance? I don't know.
Yeah.
We might not be thinking about as much here.
Right. The wheat deadline was September 30th. And I'm pretty sure RMA was already rushing to get the changes from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act put in place before that September 30th deadline. So if the shutdown came sooner, it would have absolutely affected that. In terms of what we're hearing, I mean, I'm getting different reports. Some people are saying that producers are so busy there in the fields, they're not hearing much, but also a lot of frustration with FSA offices not being open for loans, like specific cases where land deals might not go through. And I also heard that CRP payments aren't happening. And so, for some producers, that helps pay their mortgage. So, we're hearing reports that are sort of consistent with what the USDA decided to do, which is open some of these offices, because I think that is definitely having real effects out here.
Let's continue on with our polls. We will talk about some other things beyond ag, particularly the food and feeding programs, and we'll turn to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in just a moment. Our next poll is, how long do you think the government shutdown will continue? Go ahead and answer that. How long do you think the government shutdown will continue? And we'll turn our attention to a couple of things. First, while you're filling that out, remember you can ask questions of us. Up in the right-hand corner, there's a little question mark. You hit that, write your question out. We'll see it up on our screens here, and we'll be able to get that answered. Jonathan Koppisch, you've been hiding on the end down there. I know you want to talk about food and feeding programs, particularly SNAP and WIC. These have been in the national news the entire time of this shutdown, from one side or the other, either the Democrats or the Republicans, talking about the importance of funding these and how long the funding might last. What do we know about SNAP and the Farm Bill and those things related to the food and feeding programs?
I don't even know where to begin on that, Todd. I think I will caveat what I say. In my knowledge on the SNAP program is somewhat limited, but as I understand it from reporting, there's a November 1st funding problem that we're looking at. So that obviously is playing into this. There's discussions. I mean, one of the challenges always is sort of, you see reporting about contingency funds and what can be used and how much is available. And that is hard for those of us outside to know, just on where the funds sit and kind of what the level of availability might be. But one of the things we know about SNAP is it's operated at the state level, but funded through the federal government. And so there's a lot of that kind of, there may be some lags, there may be some delays in it. But it is, I think the big picture is that this breakdown, if you will, in government operations will impact all programs across the board. How much and what timing looks like on that is really an open question that it's going to be hard to answer without knowing some of the details on the data, or on the funding, what's available. We also don't know, what flexibilities the administration has or wants to use on some of these things. And so how they choose to manage in this situation is also a real challenge. And so we're kind of in the seat of watching as it unfolds as well.
I don't know if anybody else has anything to add. If you take yourself off mute, I'll see that. Otherwise, we'll get the answers to these questions. How long do you think the government shutdown will continue? Only 1% said for less than a week. 34% say 1 to 2 weeks. 30% think somewhere close to a month. And 24% of you say, well, at least 1 to 2 months. And still surprisingly, I think 2 months or more, 11% of you say that this shutdown will drag a little further. Jenny Ift, you have something to add, I believe, as it's related to the food and feeding programs.
Right. So I'm at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. We have a large Army base nearby in Junction City, Fort Riley. So a lot of military families in the area and a lot of people, civilians that work on that base. And almost immediately, we've been hearing reports that our food banks are getting quite busy. And, this is before people start having problems accessing SNAP funds. So this is probably from people who aren't getting their regular paychecks. So we saw impacts here pretty quickly.
Yeah, so you have the air base there. it's, I don't know, 15 miles from you.
Army base.
Yes, sorry. My apologies. They do. It is Army Air. It is Army Air Corps, though, if I remember correctly.
Might be.
Still, yeah. Maybe. Well, I'm hearing no. I've only been by a couple of times. I was thinking that was the case. Nonetheless, thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. So the food banks are really working overtime, not only around the military who are now being paid, but they were worried about that to begin with. And I don't know what the contingency is for the length of time and how long they can manage to pay some of the folks that work for the federal government, including the military and others. Of course, there are people like those that are coming back to FSA, 2, I think, per office, who I'm going to guess are
So-
not being paid and
Right.
are there, as Mark had told us earlier.
Yeah, I mean, this is that rock and hard place kind of position. So you may have, based on reporting, they have opened county offices and trying to staff with 2 people. Those people are, I cannot imagine they're being paid. So I think that's probably the first thing everybody should remember when they walk into a county office is that you're probably talking to individuals who are not receiving paychecks but have been told to go back to work, and they're going to be flooded. It's going to be a lot of work and a lot of things for them to manage in that office. I mean, 2 people, they're going to struggle. And so I think, our first set of thoughts is that we want them to be able to manage through it. And hopefully everybody is patient and understands that issue dealing with the county offices. And then it's a question of, I would imagine at that office level, just kind of triaging between the work. What is the most, what fires are burning the most? What are the most pressing issues? So as Jenny mentioned, loans are going to be a big issue. If you've got a mortgage or you got a sale you're closing on, the marketing assistance loans. One of the outstanding questions I still have on this is what funding is available even for some of these, because we did see a transfer of Commodity Credit Corporation funds right at the deadline before the shutdown. And if that was the Q1 funding for everything from CRP to ARC and PLC and marketing loans, then I don't know what funding is available for those too. So I say that mostly that when you walk into that office, not only you're dealing with stressed out, unpaid employees who are overwhelmed with work, there may not be a lot that they can do. If funding is not there, you should understand that could be part of what we're seeing is that they're there to open the office. The office may not be able to actually access funding through Commodity Credit Corporation or elsewhere if that is kind of held up in whatever's going on. So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. And again, knowing the kind of work and how hard they work at those county offices, we do want to respect that they're in a real bind here in this stretch.
And certainly they will understand that you're just as stressed, probably more stressed than they are in particular. So be kind from both sides when you walk into those offices. Let's continue on with some of the other questions we have for you for the polls. We want to know what your primary concern might be if this shutdown is prolonged. A loss of or gaps in market sector information and data, like we've already talked about with Mark Schleusner, cash flow or income impacts, delays in the lack of programs, administration support, something else, and you're just simply not concerned in the mean space. We'll turn our attention back to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA, or the Triple BA. I like all 3 of those.
OB3, when somebody using OB3?
Yeah, OB3. Thank you. Yes. So what do we know about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and what it did not cover, Jonathan, which still needs to be done? Sometimes this is referenced as the skinny farm bill that hasn't come to fruition yet.
I mean, the number one thing that's left unaddressed in the reconciliation farm bill or the provisions in the OB3 is really the conservation reserve program. And I think of all the ones that are really concerning in a functional reality, particularly given the situation we have right now with the soybean market challenges in China, the uncertainty around the CRP and the acres that are enrolled in that program or seeking to get re-enrolled in that program, I think that's a really big concern and something we'd like to see Congress address sooner rather than later. Of course, I want to be clear, if you've got a CRP, if you've got acres enrolled and you've got a contract, that's a 10-year contract. So your contract continues even if the program has not been reauthorized. Now, the funding still remains a question. We don't know if the funds are there in the CCC to make those annual rental payments. So that's a yet to be determined. But this, hits at a really unfortunate time outside of the government shutdown. Even is that in the fall, right? If those contracts have expired and the acres have come out of the program, and there's uncertainty about being able to re-enroll them, obviously we're going to see a lot of pressure on landlords to find somebody to farm that land. And so we could see acres go back into production that are sitting in that kind of limbo state. And my concern again comes back around to, what these acreage footprints look like without the huge Chinese demand for soybeans and how that plays out, market prices and other challenges. And so out of that, I think the CRP was one of the big ones. A lot of the other programs are authorized and appropriated. And so usually those get picked up in an appropriations process, which is now in the government shutdown challenge. So I think there are a lot to be addressed, but given what we're seeing, I would want to minimize expectations and or hopes for any kind of skinny farm bill or otherwise. I think we're not likely to see a whole lot given the challenges Congress has. So really the next thing that comes up is the December 31st deadline on the reversion to permanent law, which could be its own conversation. And I will try to keep us out of that mess.
What was the quote that the what?
See, I didn't even want to say it, Todd. I was trying to avoid, I was trying to find a nice way around it. Technically, when the 2018 Farm Bill and the extensions of it expired, and what was not included in the reconciliation provisions is a suspension of permanent law, the 1949 Act, 1938 Act provisions that are supposed to snap back into place if Congress doesn't continue the suspension. Congress did not continue the suspension in the reconciliation Farm Bill. And so we are approaching the first crop year is the dairy crop year on January 1st. And so for those with who remember the beautiful, wonderful mess that was the 2012 extension fight in that Farm Bill, the dairy cliff. And we may be hearing about the dairy cliff again, I would guess in about a month and a half. And that's where dairy policy technically would revert. Now, technical reversion and actual operational reversion are two very different things. And I think the idea of reverting to 90% parity loan rates and allotments and that sort of thing is kind of hard to imagine we get into, but it's one of these items left on the to-do list. If I were ranking them, I'd put CRP as the really big one, and I'd put that one as kind of, we need to get to that, but we assume Congress will do something before the end of the calendar year to avoid the dairy problem.
Why is CRP the really big one?
Because it's expired and we've got a lot of uncertainty around acres, and it's coming at a time when the market challenges particularly for soybeans really raise concerns about whether or not those acres come out or get re-enrolled or how that works.
We'll get your answers to the poll questions, and I think Gary may have something additional to add. No, but we'll continue on with our conversation. So, what is your primary concern if the shutdown is prolonged? 38% say it's delays and lack of program administration and support. You can read through the others there. Part of it is the gaps that may be left, and as well as the cash flow or income impacts it might have on your farms or other farms across the nation. We'll bring up the next poll as well. Are there other things that you folks want to chime in on here as it's related to what's happening in DC, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the reversion to the original farm bills, those kinds of things?
There's also a credit title in the Farm Bill that hasn't been passed that needs to be addressed in the skinny Farm Bill. So there are a couple other pieces there as well. So
that has to do with what?
So that's the FSA farm loans. So the farm operating loans and the farm purchase loans that FSA operates, again, particularly those are for producers who can't get credit elsewhere. And this is a good example. That's why I'm glad Gary reminded. It's a good example of where appropriations can pick that up. If they appropriate dollars to the credit fund, then they can make the loans out of that. we presume under general kind of operating procedures. But it's a lot of those things that need the appropriations as well as the authorization, we would hope at some point, to extend that out. And really what it's doing is giving certainty to the program going forward. But there's a lot of things that were left on the table. I mean, basically, the reconciliation bill included the mandatory programs and not a lot of the authorized and appropriated programs.
This isn't the farm bill thing, but there's also the 30 million additional base acres that need to be determined before the next program year, I suppose, or whenever that happens. But I'm presuming that during the shutdown, they're not working on the details of those 30 million acres, and that could be a substantial.
That's part of the one big beautiful.
Yeah, that
Bill
is
Act
part
changes.
of that is one part of the one big beautiful bill. Will be 30 million additional base acres added to the commodity title program. That was meant to happen for the 2026 year, I believe, or as soon as practically possible.
Yeah.
So government shutdown may make that slower.
Jenny, it appears you may have some additional things that we need to think about.
Right. No, I'm just thinking with farms that are getting new base acres, then they would be able to make a choice between ARC and PLC, agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage. Typically that's March 15th. So that's coming quicker than you think. Sometimes they do extend that deadline. So, maybe it'll get pushed back to April 15th or something to accommodate those base acres coming on board. But I could definitely see that being an issue as we get into those risk management decisions in the early winter, spring.
We do have a comment, and I think this will help us get back to some things that maybe Mark Schlesinger or I will ask you about. Somebody who's listening in from an international perspective, and as I read through this comment, I was thinking, well, international and domestic as well, that they've been looking to other sources, Mark, for data and information like the International Grains Council. I saw something from them this morning. Other specific country sources that would include CONAB. Those are still coming out regularly out of Brazil, and other, as well as commercial and proprietary sources, which we don't often see, but the brokers sometimes will talk about as it's related to, what's being collected by JSA or some other places. Informa is one of those, and how that impacts what users are seeing on their end. What kinds of data sources do you or did you, as a USDA NASS state statistician, look at, if you did at all, to get comparisons for your grain and output production sizes?
My rule of thumb was not to look at anything until after we had our numbers finalized. I didn't want to
Good rule of
read
thumb.
somebody else's report and lean that way or something like that. But there are a number of, at least on the domestic side, independent private industry guesstimates, reports, estimates on what the grain productions will be. And they were typically summarized by NASS in a nice little chart that shows, here's the NASS number and here's the spread of other numbers. And that, again, is my knowledge of what's happening domestically. Internationally, that's not a world I know very well. And I give lots and lots of credit to the people at the World Ag Outlook Board who managed to take in data from many, many sources and do worldwide supply and demand estimates. That's a monster.
Yeah, I think Mark points out a really interesting aspect of sort of this. Yes, there are many other private sources, but it tends to be the case that USDA is sort of a unifying force that kind of like reconciles a lot of those things for the industry, in part because they have the ability to collect data that no one else can collect, and their data collection infrastructure is larger. And the one I would point out that was mentioned by this person asking this question was about export sales data. So the United States has probably the most robust infrastructure for collecting data on export sales from the US to other parts of the world. The thing that we might want to monitor, and speaking to, there are challenges in the soybean industry, are what are soybean export sales doing? And we haven't seen that since September 18th when we got our last export sales report. So that information is, estimated by the trade, but the range of those estimates tends to be wide, and I think it will widen as we keep going here. That's going to be a very interesting thing to see. And I know we're going to talk about what happens when the shutdown ends. I think there will be a very interesting reconciliation of the information that is produced by private sources and what we get from USDA, because they do have this really robust infrastructure for data collection.
The NOPA numbers, or the National Oilseed Processors Association figures for domestic crush, is something that the brokers.
Another one that we look at a lot, and that is arguably like just as good as USDA. I don't think there's anything on the export sales data side,
right,
that can approach that, because USDA has the ability to compel private grain companies to report export sales, and no one else does.
Well, and I would just like to take this opportunity to just let people know and reinforce this idea that I think a lot of times we're in a situation in the U.S. where we maybe take our access to market information and data from a source like the USDA for granted. I've traveled and talked with groups in agriculture in other countries, and a very consistent message I get from them is just how lucky we are in U.S. ag to sort of have that unifying and reconciling source of information. And it's something that people would miss if it were gone.
Already do.
And short-term, long-term.
Yeah, it only grows, I think, as you go longer term, right? We can miss these export sales data for a few weeks. We've been there before. The reconciliation process gets more complicated the longer we go, and that range of potential, what happened, we don't really know. As the range of sort of potential estimates grows, it just gets bigger.
The USDA, or I'm sorry, CME group, the exchanges missed them almost immediately. They didn't know until the first Trump administration shutdown went long that they would actually miss them. In fact, most of the brokers were really happy. They were not happy going in this time around. Let's get another poll. What do you expect will be the biggest challenge for USDA when the shutdown ends? We're going to talk about that, but we're going to get your thoughts about this before we get started. Do you think it'll be the backlog of demand, the information data gaps, the rush to meet upcoming deadlines, something else, some significant challenges that might come? So what will be some of those things for the shutdown? And Mark Schleusner, you dropped in something I thought was really interesting and I had not thought about, that as we were having the discussion related to the FSA offices, that those who work for USDA will not have, I guess they not only will they not be able to access their email, but those aren't being forwarded in some way. Do they shut down the systems?
Our instructions always were to shut down your computer and put an automatic email response that says, because of a shutdown, nobody's reading this message. We were given specific phrasing to do that. If you have a government phone, you're supposed to turn it off and keep it off. So you can't get a phone call, you can't see your email on your phone. And it was always quite the challenge to go through the backlog of emails. I'm thinking about those people in the Farm Service Agency offices. Somebody's got to open the mail, and I'm not sure how much physical mail they're getting, but I'm sure the email traffic is quite large. Hopefully it's going to sort of an office account that more than one person can see, but if it's going to John Smith or Jane Jones' account, they probably can't see it. No one's responding. Eventually someone will take a look at it once there is funding.
Sarah might have a comment there too.
Yeah, I think what Mark said is so true. And I think it's important for listeners to think about too. Don't send those extra emails if you don't really need to. But also just think about everything else that's going on with these employees. Hopefully the shutdown will end soon. People will be back to the office, but a lot of them are experiencing right now no paycheck. They have a disruption in childcare. I know in Washington, D.C., a lot of the federal government offices had daycare on site, so those daycares are all closed. So families are facing a lot of hardships with the lack of a paycheck, disruption in daily life. And once the shutdown ends, coming back to the office, I mean, you can imagine, we all know how many emails we get every day. So the email traffic, the demand, and typically I think Mark and Jenny will, say that typically when we come back from shutdown, we're so glad to be back in the office. We're so thankful to be back to our work serving the American people. But we have to remember the context of this particular shutdown that makes it very different than other longer shutdowns. And that's the deferred resignations, the retirements. We've already had a massive amount of turnover and just empty vacant positions within USDA going into this shutdown. So morale was low already. You add in, folks are going to be missing their October 24th paycheck. There's going to be a lot of hurt morale. And I think that enthusiasm to get back to work, to roll up the sleeves, to get caught up. I know we would always be working nights, weekends once the shutdown ended. We're getting caught up. We're so excited to get back to work. I don't know that that's going to be there this time.
Let's get the answers to the poll. And I've got a question for you all that's based on something U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Rollins said on CNBC yesterday that related to the FSA offices opening up and 2 employees coming back to work. Part of that was because there has to be a signature on USDA loans that happens in the office spaces. She mentioned that they were working on a way around that or not doing that in the future. And I wonder if that indicates anything for you as it's related to FSA offices going forward. So here's what we know from you about what you expect with the biggest challenges for USDA. Overwhelmingly, you say the demand for programs and services will be the problem, 48%. I do want to get our next poll up so that you can get this answered before we actually answer it for you. The next poll says, how long do you think it will take USDA and other agencies to recover from the impacts of the shutdown? How long do you think long do you think it will take USDA to get themselves recovered? Anybody have a comment on what the secretary said yesterday? I had some thoughts on it, but I'm a reporter, so I always am cynical. Anybody else have ideas of what that might actually mean?
I like that you're looking at me. I
honestly,
don't.
I'm not looking at you.
I honestly do not have. I don't know how to interpret that. If it's a loan on which USDA is the lending the organization, they kind of. I mean, not to get into legal contracting nerd land, but you kind of have to have signatures, and I mean that stuff's pretty basic in contracts. So I don't know what exactly the secretary is referring to. If it's just a paperwork workaround, or if we're talking about something fundamental. So I do think that, Todd, just to be fair, that's a question that should go back into the department and to the secretary to clarify exactly what you mean. Because if it is a loan from FSA, you presume that for a enforceable contract to exist, that both parties, particularly any party you're going to charge against it, who has signed the contract.
I will be sure that I'm not the only reporter that picked that up yesterday, listening to what she had to say. So a couple of other questions that we need to get asked. Are you aware of any decisions on tariff payments and how those will be handled? At this point, because I cover this every day, we haven't heard very much about this since it first came out, that they were going to make some payments. And then, of course, there was a government shutdown and they couldn't use anything from the tariffs to make those payments to begin with. So the question is there going to be a payment to soybean producers? If so, how much? When might it come? Anybody have any ideas?
Okay, so assuming the same way you are, when we talk about tariff payments, they mean the somewhat promised but as yet defined economic assistance, next round of economic assistance. So we should be clear. We've got ARC and PLC payments that are held up.
Right.
Marketing assistance loans still also in that limbo state.
Mm-hmm.
There were the ECAP payments, about $10 billion that were appropriated last year. Those have been issued and those are
Twice,
out.
correct.
And there has been discussion, at least in the press or whatever you call social media, that there's another round of payments coming.
I do not call social media press.
Good. It's not. Another round of payments coming, and we have no details on that.
Yeah.
What we did see was a drawdown of the CCC account and a transfer to the Office of the Secretary, $13 billion
beforehand.
right before the end of the fiscal year and the shutdown. That may indicate a pot of money that they have available to do that. So that would be one thing we're waiting to see details on. Of course, if that was the money that was expected to be used for marketing loans, ARC-PLC, CRP, and all the conservation programs, that then raises a question of how those programs operate if the funding isn't there. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this that really leave uncertainty. The one thing I have gotten some clarity on is that what's called Section 32, or the tariff dollars, there is not an easy transfer of tariff dollars. In fact, the tariff dollars coming in now will not be available. So the big tariffs that Trump has implemented, or the variety of tariffs that he's implemented, those funds aren't available for another year. So there is not a huge pot of money in Section 32, as I understand it, that could also be transferred into a payment program. So we're likely looking at that kind of taking from one set of programs to possibly create their own program situation with that $13 billion in the Secretary's office. That's about all we know at this point in time until we get more details from USDA.
Okay, let's get the answers to our question, and then we'll wrap this thing up with what you all believe can be expected when the shutdown ends. 54% of you on the other side of this say that you expect it will take USDA and other agencies somewhere between 1 and 3 months to recover from the shutdown. We can close that poll. I think that's our last poll. If there's another one, Jim Boltz will let me know. A quick question, Mark, for you. What's the latest date that the government can open to allow NASS to start collecting crop production data to make a November 10 release? And then what happens in the December survey? I suppose I'll add that on as well.
Data collection usually starts about 5 days before the reference date. So October 25 or 26 would be the normal beginning of data collection for the November. Did I say that right? October 26 would be the beginning of data collection for a November 10 report. In terms of the December end of season report, it's a much larger sample. I believe it starts earlier, probably would start around November 20 with mail out. And then phoning would follow up in right after Thanksgiving.
Okay, let's get some final comments from each of you. We'll have some questions along the way as well. I think, Ginny, maybe we should start with you as it's related to what to expect during the shutdown, and Sarah as well, because you've gone through these before. I want to know from your perspective as former employees in these USDA offices, how things are managed after the government comes back to work.
Right. It's a little hard to remember back to 2013, but I know you know everyone's back and you're triaging right away. I think somebody said triage before, and that's the big word. But I think sort of big picture, what I'm seeing is that the longer that the shutdown goes on, there's compounding. So there's a lot of uncertainty of what the actual impacts are going to be. But the more reports that get delayed, if SNAP starts going out, if you have hungry people, it gets worse and worse the longer it goes on. And I think we're about to start to see what that looks like unless it ends soon.
I'll just add. Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask you to continue on, Sarah.
Okay, great. I'll just add from the employee perspective point of view, absolutely, we get back, we try to triage. But I think Jenny's point is correct. The problem is compounding. And typically when we come back, we think about how do we catch up on the schedule. But I think with a long shutdown like this, particularly when I see the poll results and I see the skepticism amongst our participants. With a longer shutdown, it's really more, what are we just going to let go? And I had a project, a survey that was contracted out with Iowa State that when after I think the 2018 shutdown, we just said, we're just not going to do this. This is just never going to happen. And so that is going to be a conversation that we don't typically have after shutdowns, but with a long one like this and the workforce characteristics currently, I think there's going to be a lot more talk about not triaging and solving problems, but what do we just cut? So be
Anything
careful.
else from the rest of you on questions we've seen and not answered? Particularly, we are at the top of the hour, so we're mostly done of the things that you want to talk about related to the shutdown or things that have not happened during the shutdown or might happen as we come back.
I'd maybe reiterate the point Jenny made about the longer it goes on, the more things become compounded in terms of what it's like when employees do come back to work. And again, I think a lot of the impacts, we could maybe think that they're not big. Farmers are busy with harvest. Maybe demand is relatively low in kind of that first few weeks period. But again, as this, if and as this extends into November, I think it'll start to be felt by a larger, wider group of individuals, and kind of the catch-up period just gets worse and worse.
From a crop farmer, Midwest crop farmer standpoint, the first thing, obviously, our county PLC payments are delayed. They'll probably happen relatively soon. Then we have the next ECAP, which who knows if that's going to happen, but
Or what they'll call it.
Or what they'll call it. So that will be in the works, and then it's on to 2026. And I guess the big thing again is the delays now. I mean, we don't, for example, we do know what our PLC programs look like. We don't know what base acres will be on farms yet, which I don't know if that will influence decisions. But then we don't know what the rates are for 2026 crops. Those typically are released November 30th for corn and soybeans. We'd like to see what they are before making any sort of decisions.
We'd like to thank our sponsors here today as well for our webinar. They include the TIA Center for Farmland Research, CoBank, Compeer Financial, Farm Credit Illinois, FS Growmark, the Illinois Corn Growers Association, the Illinois Soybean Association, and John Deere. Our educational partners for the day include the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics, University of Illinois Extension, the Farm Business Farm Management Organization in the state of Illinois, and the Gardner Agricultural Policy Program. Do remember, you can always pick these programs up anytime you'd like on our website at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu. With that, we'll wrap up our program today. The FarmDoc team thanks you. We appreciate the fact that Sarah Lowe, who's the department head here for Agricultural and Consumer Economics, has joined us, along with Jenny Epp from Gift from Kansas State University. Thank you so much. And Mark Schleusner, who is a retired Illinois State statistician with USDA NASS. On behalf of Jonathan Koppas, Joe Jansen, Nick Paulson, Gary Schnicke, and Jim Baltz, who is behind the scenes, we appreciate that you've been along with us as well. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.